Hi guys, I'm back. So as I was saying, Nixon is going to be pro-affirmative action, not really something you would expect from someone who is such a lack of supporter of, civil rights and stuff like that. But he does support the hiring of more women and minorities, especially in kind of government jobs. So when we talk about Nixon's foreign policy, there's kind of one rock star, and that's Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, as we know, is the person who was dealing with everything that was going on with the end of Vietnam, right? He's instrumental in that and those peace talks. He is his national security advisor and later on Secretary of State because, again, he serves 2 terms, right? And he said we need to do something called realpolitik. So in the past, we know we talked about containment and brinkmanship and always do this, always do that. Realpolitik is very similar to flexible response, which we talked about with John F. Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this idea that you just do what's best at the time, given the situation, which would really just be called like common sense foreign policy, but they call it realpolitik. Don't be bound by these broad principles. When it comes to Nixon's communist policy, it is called détente. So détente, think about decrease, DC, something is going down. Détente is a de-escalation of tension. This means that we're going to decrease tensions with the Soviet Union in hopes of building a more stable world. So that's what Richard Nixon is going to be all about. SALT 1. SALT stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. Basically decrease the use of nuclear weapons, right? SALT 1 is with Richard Nixon. SALT 2 is going to be with Jimmy Carter, and we'll talk about that in class. So SALT 1, eventually we're going to agree to a 5-year slowdown program of weapons that we're going to make last, but the USSR isn't really coming to the conversation and bringing a lot to the table. They're very, slow about it. They're not really giving a lot. They're playing hard to get. So Nixon does something kind of brilliant, and we shouldn't learn from it ourselves, but it worked for the time. So Nixon basically essentially flirts with China. So China, big communist nation, right? We have never spoken to them. We have always backed that, the leaders who fled to Taiwan are still the ones in power. We never saw China as legitimate, and we know that you have Mao Zedong as the leader of China, and we never spoke to him anything, no diplomacy. And Nixon gets an invitation to a table tennis match in China. You know those things that presidents get they never look at, and he's like, aha, this is my lead-in. He travels to China. There's some great pictures of him awkwardly eating Chinese food and wearing big fur coats on the Great Wall of China, which are fantastic. And he basically flirts with China, trying to make the USSR get jealous. And it works. It works. So he says, if I talk with China and the USSR gets nervous that I'm talking with China and I'm all buddy-buddy with them, maybe they'll pay attention and be more negotiable in those SALT talks. And that's exactly what happens. So again, in 1972 when he visits, he opens up China. That's what we credit Nixon with doing. He does not legitimately recognize it as a government, but he visits, and it is a successful visit because of that. The Middle East is pretty much where we left it. It is going to be a mess between what's going on with Israel and Egypt and Syria. And this region, as we still know today, is going to be just fraught with so much tension. So from 73 to 74, major political and religious issues like the rest of the world, but we said the Middle East is so complicated because of the oil there, right? Because of the economic interest that so many places have. So in 1967, Israel had warred with Egypt and Syria and had occupied some of their land, right? In 73, this boils over into the Yom Kippur War, and Egypt and Syria attack Israel, and the Soviet Union gives them materials for this attack, which is key. And then in turn, we give materials to Israel. And now, again, everybody's involved. And then you have the U.S. With backing Israel, OPEC, which is going to be that group of all of the oil-producing countries in the Arab world, in the Middle East, and also some others. They all get together and they're like, no oil for the United States if they're going to back Israel. This creates, as it would today, a massive energy crisis in our country. You are going to see a big-time oil crisis, people lining up around the block for oil prices, all of this. And for gas and everything else, the prices go up, shipping costs go up, machine costs go up. There's major inflation, and keep in mind this is going to be a problem during Nixon's administration. Jimmy Carter is really the one who inherits the mess here. Okay, Jimmy Carter is going to have to deal with the realities of it. Nixon tries to do a price freeze, doesn't work. Everything is a mess. It doesn't work to tame that inflation. And again, the true crisis of this is going to be dealt with Jimmy Carter, because then everyone's like, oh my God, Watergate with Nixon. So keep that in mind. By the way, Henry Kissinger, today if you're having a meeting or a summit, between world leaders, you get them all in a room. Israel and these other countries hate each other so much that they will not get in the same room together, which is why when later we talk about Jimmy Carter getting them all to Camp David, that's a huge deal, right? But they won't even get in the same room with each other, which is pretty crazy. So Henry Kissinger has to do what's called shuttle diplomacy. So he like runs over to Egypt and is like, oh, Israel just said this. What do you think? And they're like, I hate this. Go up and tell them. Then he runs over to Israel and tells them that. He's like, well, this is what they said in response to what you said. He is flying back and forth constantly, constantly. And we know today that's what you just do as someone who was Secretary of State. Remember when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, was flying so much she was hospitalized for exhaustion. She had like that little meltdown where she kind of fell off the plane. But this is going to be just what he has to do, and this bad blood's going to continue. And unfortunately, it's still there today, right? When we talk about these Middle Eastern countries and all that tension with Israel and Egypt. So when you and I talk about Richard Nixon in class, we are going to talk about Watergate, and that's going to be great for us, not for Nixon, obviously. So I will see you then. Bye, guys.